In this video, I'm going to talk about the reasons behind psychological operations. Now, what is a psychological operation? A psychological operation is an operation where the minds of people are distracted from noticing something else. That's it. That's what a psychological operation is. Now, individual narcissists tend to put others in a negative daylight so that people won't notice what bad stuff they're doing. It can be someone is molesting a child somewhere and then they put negative tension on a neighbor. So everyone's talking about the neighbor and the neighbor's reaction, but they don't look at him, what he's doing. So narcissists also have their tiny psychological operations, but we don't call it a psychological operation because it's not big. A psychological operation is something that's conducted on a mass scale. So when a narcissist does a similar thing, instead of calling it a psychological operation, we call it gaslighting. Okay? Now, a psychological operation, or is shortened as Psyops, is conducted to influence society as a whole. Because there is some change, or some shift, better said, that's about to take place that the population will likely not accept. And because the leaders or the stakeholders within that region, they know very well that this change or this shift is inevitable, or they know that it's better to have this shift instead of letting things get out of hand, they know that the shift that they plan to enforce will not be taken well. So they have to distract the minds of the people so that when the change happens, when the shift occurs, people wouldn't notice it. So people become acclimatized to the new situation without them being aware of it. Okay. Let's say now that you have several corporations that want to make more profit in Asia. Okay, that's fine. But now you have Chinese people that want to purchase their corporations. But the Chinese people know that if they change the names of those corporations into Chinese names, that people will revolt. So Chinese buyers told them, when you purchase this company from you, we'll leave the name as it is, but it will be governed from Beijing. Okay? But then, after the takeover, the Chinese wanted to put Chinese workers in their companies. Let's say let's take a site for example, Luxembourg. Let's say that you have Luxembourgian corporations and some quote-unquote billionaire from China buys them all. Luxembourg doesn't have a high population. It's a very tiny country. So by doing that, that billionaire now has a grip on 60% of the Luxembourgian economy. Of course, the Chinese billionaire needs to comply with EU law and all of that, but he now has a big hold on the Luxembourgian economy. Now, the people from Luxembourg would not accept this, that a foreigner purchases almost all. Well, it's not really all of the economy, but if you own like 60% of the corporations, well, actually, you own almost the whole economy. And now, this billionaire wants to put Chinese folks as managers and CEOs. This is all something that's not likely to be accepted by the population. So after a while, the authorities of Luxembourg, together with this Chinese billionaire, they came up with a plan. They would enact several kidnappings. Those kidnappings are fake, so they hired crisis actors to do it. And now throughout Luxembourg for the next 4 months, he has 3 kidnapping cases that captured the minds of the Luxembourgian population. And within those 4 months, the old CEOs from European descent were replaced with Chinese ones. And 10% of the staff was fired. And now you had Chinese people there. So after a while, the leadership of those corporations was fully Chinese, and 10% of the employees were Chinese also. The billionaire fulfilled the plan to only let Chinese work in the companies just realized that it goes too far. So after those 4 months, suddenly the media starts reporting about those kidnappings, and even police doesn't talk about it anymore. Because many police officers wanted to know more about it, but they figured out that it's a hoax, but they kept their mouth shut. So now you have a new situation where Luxembourg is financially governed by a Chinese billionaire, and most of the bosses, CEOs, and employers in Luxembourg are Chinese. But the Luxembourgian people just got used to it. Suddenly you had many Chinese people there, and they thought, oh, this will just come here to work. And because they did work, they didn't bother with it, because they thought, if those Chinese folks come here just to get welfare or to exploit us, it will be different. What's going on now? Now you have 60% of the businesses in Luxembourg being run by Chinese folks, and you have many more Chinese migrants there. Let's say the Luxembourg was a very xenophobic nation, that they didn't like to have many foreigners. But now you have an increase in foreigners there who even refuse to speak the local language, but the population got used to it. How? Through psychological operations. So a psychological operation distracts a population, and at the same time it molds the perception of the population so they don't see what's going on. Now, a psychological operation is a collective program. It will not affect every individual in the community. Okay? There will always be people that are alert. There will always be people that realize, hold on a minute, this is a bit weird. There was one, let's go to the example I gave, that parable. Some would say, okay, last week there was a kidnapping. 3 Bosnian guys kidnapped 4 women. Okay, there was a big hysteria in it throughout Luxembourg. And then, now, this week you have another kidnapping. But at the same time, you may notice that there are many Chinese tourists around here. And some think, oh, okay, maybe they're just tourists. But then others are going to say, hold on a minute. It's not the season for tourism. Why are they here? Chinese people don't have holidays at this time. Why are those people here? But when the few people, very tiny amount of people begin to ask those questions, the rest of the population has this resistant attitude, and they often tell those people, shut up, stop bothering us, there's a kidnapping going on again, because the people are distracted by the Psyops. And you talk about Chinese people being here, okay, maybe they have extra holidays, who cares, let it go. It's only after the psychological operation has long been done, maybe like a year or 2, that people begin to notice that something has changed. But they can't point out what changed because they didn't realize that the change was happening. But because they were distracted, they now acclimatize to the change without them being aware of it. So when people's eyes eventually open, they have a whole another situation, a situation they may not want, but a situation is there already. If the situation was about to happen, they could have resisted it, they could have prevented it. But now, they can't resist it nor prevent because it's there. And if they now want to go against it, it will cause a lot of unnecessary chaos and a lot of unnecessary violence. So people then just get along with the new situation, even though they don't want a new situation. That's what a psychological operation is. Now look, a psychological operation doesn't have to be evil, okay? Let's say that an economy is about to collapse, and now there needs to be a shift in the economy. But the common people are so used to how things were. They're so used to the past. So are you going to wait till the economy crashes completely and people are without jobs and crime increases and people are dying? No. You're going to make the population comply with the new situation, which is necessary. And that's why they also use psychological operations. Now, often when they use psychological operations, it's for evil. Because remember, those that rule this world worship the beast. So most of the psychological operations they do are just evil. Once in a while, they may conduct a psychological operation for a good cause. But they only do such things to blind you from all the other bad stuff they're doing. So if they conduct 10 psychological operations, 2 of them may be for a good cause. But those 2 are just a cover up. The other 8 were meant for evil purposes. Just realize that mainstream media, as well as mega churches, and also today's social media is used to distract you from things that are around you. And I'm going to tell you what these psychological operations are all about. Very simple. The Anglo-American era, in which the United States was dominant, is over. The Anglo-American era, I call it the Anglo-American era because it was really the assets of the British Empire that the United States took over on behalf of Britain. Because before the Second World War, the United States was like the financial extension of the British Empire, because Britain was the decision maker in the world. After the Second World War, America rose, they had a bubble by taking advantage of what was left of the British Empire, which wasn't that much. So it was an Anglo-American era, and here's why. Before the Second World War, you had many British companies and British corporations that were active in the American economy, whether directly or indirectly. So you had American businesses, but there were British owners behind them. And this continued after the Second World War. So you had an Anglo-American era. But the Anglo-American era, which was really an extension of the British era that began in 1830, that era is gone since 2008. That's why when Obama came in his campaign for presidency, he talked about change, change, change. A lot of people are thinking, what is he talking about? Is he talking about he becoming the first black president, or what is it? People were so distracted by the visuals, they didn't pay attention. The change that happened was that the hegemony of the United States was over. There was nothing left of the British Empire anymore to feed off, and they really used it all up. So now there's a shift towards Islamic world. But there is no actual Islamic country that has taken the leadership of the Islamic world yet. But it's the Islamic world now that has gained economic and financial relevance. So they're the ones now that are taking over the decision-making role in the world. But there is no Islamic country to do it. Because even in an Islamic world, there are divisions. Think about Iran versus Saudi Arabia. However, it was obvious since the end of the 2000s that since 2005 it was obvious that things were heading towards the Islamic world. Well, actually it was obvious since the 1990s, but after 9/11 it was far more clear. So the shift was introduced by Obama. Obama was the transition phase from the Anglo-American era towards the Islamic era. However, because there is no direct leadership from the Islamic world now, we are still in an extension of the transition. Okay? So those psychological operations, of which 9/11 was the first one, they began doing these things to distract Europeans, white Americans, and also East Asians, who are also into this whiteness thing. They wanted to distract them from the shift that was going on. Because they knew very well that the demographic change in Europe and white America it wouldn't happen without violence. So that was obvious. The demographic challenge also implies that migrants of color would increase in Europe and the United States at the expense of the white population. And they knew very well that sooner or later you will have extreme right-wing white groups that will use violence to protect their heritage, or what they claim is their heritage. So they saw all of this coming. Okay? They saw that the increase of the Islamic economies would lead to enormous clash. So that means those who rule this world, wanted to manage this clash. Okay? That's why you had 9/11, you had Al-Qaeda, later ISIS, and all of that. It's all to manage the clash, because the clash is going to come anyway. But because they want the clash to happen as smooth as possible, they want to control the violence as much as they can, That's why you have those Psyops. Now, I'm not saying that during the Psyops nobody dies. Because the Psyop can either be a complete hoax, or there can be a partial hoax in which indeed people die, but the story they tell is a BS story. Now, whether people really died or not, those psychological operations that are happening throughout mainstream media lately are to distract East Asians, that means Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, Taiwanese people, and also Mongolian people, is to distract East Asians as well as white people from the shift towards Islamic decision making. That is why those Psyops are happening. And don't get things twisted. The clash will happen anyway. The eruptions of violence, the resistance, it will happen anyway. But they didn't want it to just happen naturally, because those rulers world, they claim to be gods. So to validate their false sense of being gods, they wanted to manage it, because they know it's going to happen, but they manage it. They want to manage it as much as possible so that the shift happens smoothly. It's not the first time in human history that the decision making went from one empire towards another. When the Spanish Empire self-destructed, the British took over. Going further in the past, when the Viking Empire collapsed, the French took over. Okay? But they didn't do much, but okay, the clash happened. And there was also a transition period, ranging from 3 or 4 to, so, like, to 15 or 20 years. There was always a transition period before the new situation was really stable. Okay? Now, there were some shifts that were instant. For example, the destruction of the Dutch Republic, which ended the Dutch era in 1672, while the Viking era, which was taught by France taking over Britain, that happened within a week or something like that. But just so that you understand, those shifts from decision making in the world often, let's say not often, often there is a transition phase in between. Okay? You had it 1826, the Spanish Empire was over. 1830, the British took over. Okay, so it was a transition of 4 years. Now, the Obama era, not really an era, but Obama presidency, which lasted 8 years, was meant to be the transition. But near the end of Obama's presidency, there was still no Islamic power to take the lead. So then they wanted to speed up the process by letting in so many migrants from an Islamic background into Europe. Why? Because many parts of Europe are depopulating at the moment. So Europe was depopulating in many areas. That would affect the economy. So that economy would collapse if there were no other people to replace them. Now, so they need migrants to replace the parts of the population that's dying out. But there was also no actual Islamic leadership yet. So they pushed Muslim migration to prevent the collapse of Europe's economy, due to the dying out in key places of the population. And by doing this, they made sure that Islam already had a foothold in Europe for when they began to make decisions. That is why you have all those Psyops. Now, do I know exactly how the Islamic decision making is going to look like? No. 2016 was the year that some Islamic power, country or group, should have taken the lead. Still none has done it. By 2020, it's expected that one of them will do. Well, I don't know how it's going to work. It will likely be the Muslim population in Europe, the migrant population, that will work through the EU. That's the most likely scenario. Nevertheless, it's happening. You can't go back to the Anglo-American era because it's over. And the transition phase has taken a while now, since 2008. Just know that a transition phase can even last for 20 years, which is like a generation. Anyway, just know that despite what's going to happen in the future, Christ is Lord. So obey Him, keep walking by faith, and be at peace.